everyone. Kathy, Rachel, good to see you all. It's Tom Sidney Bushnell, aka Numbers. Welcome to Psych.Club. And as I've just alluded to, we have Rachel, Right Side Blonde, Kathy, Mrs. Handy Are You, and Mr. JUAN O SAVIN. So how are you doing in Vegas, Juan? It looks like you're looking at the hotel room that I might have been in, but I don't think it is. I think you're further up in the building.
Oh, I move around a bit, so I enjoy. There's a certain direction that I enjoy the view in, and I like to see the lights at night and like that. And so a lot of times I have stuff going, and I like to enjoy the show.
That's the Beatles Love Building, isn't it, in front of you?
Yeah, they've got a show. Let's see, where's the Beatles are? It is.
Yeah.
So they have a Beatles show here, and I think I had somebody the other night that told me they went to it. The Blue Men show is here. AC/DC's or Metallica is doing a concert here. I think tomorrow night. So there's nice. All the bands are out there, the shows are out there, and of course I haven't had time to go see a show since I think it's been 5 years since I've been to a show, although especially since COVID BS, they shut things down. The show's only been around for about 4 or 5 months now at this point. And but I just have not had even breath to get to go see a show.
Enter Sandman, Metallica. I remember President Trump playing Enter the Sandman at some of his, or at least one of his press conferences when he was president. And I also remember the reference in Back to the Future, Sandman with the band from, I guess, the 40s or 50s. That's like a different version of it. So the elephant in the room today, one is Ukraine. So I wanted to start off with a couple of questions about Ukraine. We're going to try to broadcast this on YouTube as much as we can. So I've got two.
Remember Ukraine. We might be a couple. By the time you post this, the whole situation will be even more developed. But
I'm sure it will be.
I'll try to get you in the zone. But go ahead.
So there's 2 points. Yeah. So it gets in the zone. There's 2 questions I've got. So. I've always been led to believe, and I believe it through the numbers and other things, that President Putin is working with President Trump, and I heard something today that made some sense, saying that Russian troops were going in and taking over certain regions in Ukraine, and that made more sense. Why the sense of a kind of invasion on the ground. Clearing up areas that needed to be cleared up, for want of a better word. The dark hat side of things, black hat. I see you've got your hat there. And I'm wondering if there's even bigger thing that maybe is not obvious even to people in the movement that may be going on there. Because I know, the team is fully efficient in everything that they do. I'm wondering if there's a bigger part, maybe linking to things like the capital city that you pointed out to me before, over in that sort of region of the world, a little further kind of east, linking to a cold place as well in the future. I'm just wondering if there's a bigger thing. So maybe kind of what's happening now on the ground. Is there any truth to, they're just taking out certain regions? Is Putin working with Trump? And is there a bigger thing that's going on that we may not be fully privy to for a while? So
well, let's say this correctly. It's actually painful to say it the wrong way. Putin is not working with Trump. That idea, while it's been out there and it's been floated, Russia. First off, it was established that Trump never coordinated his actions, his run for office, at any way, at any time with the Russians. That just was not true. And some people speculated because, of course, they met and they communicated that somehow Putin was going to work with Trump or something like that. Putin's going to work for Putin. Russia's got their own interests. They, to borrow an old Reagan term, will trust but verify. They were promised certain things at the end of the Cold War about how NATO would function. Remember, NATO is essentially an extension of the US and US policy. And they were promised that we would not encroach on the Soviet Union and present a threat to the Soviet Union militarily, to Russia, I should say. Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. We won World War III. A lot of people, oh, World War III, World War III, World War III. Excuse me. A bunch of very brave, determined individuals. Reagan himself fought a war during the Reagan administration to bring down the Soviet Union, the evil empire. World War III was won, but primarily without actually engaging military forces and some massive loss of life. There were engagements that are mostly unknown or misunderstood, but we won World War III. The West, led by America under Reagan, won World War III. The Soviet Union's gone. As the negotiations in that post-Cold War environment, after the wall came down, the understandings, the agreements, legal agreements about NATO and how it would deploy forces, where they would be kept and placed, this theory, this policy of hegemony, building a hedge around Russia to encapsulate the communist mentality, the Soviet Russian people. Those agreements gave Russia some level of protection and agreements to not threaten the Russian people militarily. And that goes all the way back to World War II and before. That Nazi mentality, what did Putin refer to? Even in his morning presentation this morning at 5:50 in the morning, Moscow time. You want to do the numbers? Why 5:50? 5. The number of deaths to enemies. 5. The number of defense to the occult. He sent a direct message to that occult power group occupying control across Europe and into the United States, the people pulling the strings on governments across the world. Death to enemies and defense, you're going to threaten us? 5:50 in the morning, we threaten you right back. Sorry I get so animated, but you got to understand these things that are in play right now have been in play for decades and decades and decades. This didn't just happen. And Trump is not coordinating this with Russians or Putin. Trump is not technically in control of any of what's happening here. The Biden administration and the people controlling it from behind the scenes, the globalists working out of the city of London, are completely, totally responsible for what is happening right now. And while I don't give Russia a pass for doing what they're doing in the Ukraine right now, what Putin has said, he's going into Ukraine to demilitarize it and to denazify it. the use of the term Nazis goes back to World War II and before. The people that are violating those agreements are the ones in the West that have been working out agreements and by degrees, over and over, repeatedly moving closer and closer to Russia with a militarized NATO agreements and forces moving closer by degrees and becoming a threat to Russia, and then wanting to plant weapon systems closer and closer to Russia. Russia is responding as to be expected. They're going to protect their borders, protect their civilization from these threats. And so Putin, he's protecting his people. I'm not going to hold it against him that he's doing exactly what he said he was going to do for his nation. The problem is wars erupt when diplomacy fails. And the policy behind the diplomacy of this current administration and the people that have been pulling those strings in the background for a couple of decades has been to push and push and push and push Russia to engage them, not just in the Ukraine, but down there with its alliance with Syria. Remember, the whole point in trying to do something with Russia's role in Syria was to deprive Russia of a warm water port. That whole Crimea situation, what was going on there with the prior administration under Obama and the Clinton-run State Department and that whole Rockefeller-Clinton UN crowd? What were they doing? They were trying to start a civil war in Syria. That's what Benghazi was all about. When I first came out and talked publicly, in the aftermath of Benghazi, where I was talking with people behind the scenes, but then they would say things that were not accurate in what I had shared with them. And they went off on all sorts of bizarre, wild extrapolations. And I had to tone it back down, say it for myself directly so I couldn't be construed with other people's stuff. Benghazi was all about a gun running operation being run out of the West by various players coordinating and working through the State Department and the UN to pre-position arms in these Red Cross emergency refugee centers that were on the borders of Syria, in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Jordan, to wage a civil war in Syria, but it wasn't a civil war truly. It was outside forces and the mercenaries being trained in various parts of the world, and especially mercenaries being trained around Benghazi in Syria to be run up to the borders of Syria, infiltrated into Syria to do a civil war in Syria, to take down the government in Syria with Assad, to attack the Alawite groups, which are, Christian groups. They're not exactly Christian in the sense that many of us in the West would construe it, but they're still Christian groups. To create this civil war in Syria so you could dismantle Syria, so they could run an oil pipeline from Saudi Arabia to Europe to provide the energy for Europe for the next 100 years, including across Turkey. What's this whole situation with Russia right now out there in Ukraine? It's a gas pipeline going into Germany to provide energy into Europe and access to retailing energy in Europe for the next 100 years. Who gets to supply the energy to Europe out into the future? Or is the alternative the energy oil pipeline coming out of off the coast of Lebanon that Israel claims to control as their field, that would then go up through Montenegro and that direction and bypass Turkey and all that stuff that the Russians own a part of. All of these different angles. Or is it the West going to supply compressed natural gas by huge tankers, bringing them into Germany and provide the energy to Germany? I personally presented conferences and speakers at various places here in the West and overseas about the geopolitics of energy over the last couple of years. The world goes round, runs on energy. Even now, the G7 is talking and just passed sanctions amongst themselves. They're going to do full sanctions on Russia. And what are they going to cut off? Energy flow from Russia. The energy that they sell in the form of oil and gas that pays their bills domestically. It's the biggest source of income for Russia to run their internal economy. They sell stuff to the world, and it's energy. And so you're really looking at, behind the scenes, people's trying to do an energy war for the control of the flow of energy across the free world. What was the manner in which we first initiated this takedown of the Soviet Union back in the 80s under Reagan? We brought the price of energy down to the ground using the Saudi ability to produce huge quantities of oil at extremely low prices, because their oil lift cost, the cost to get the oil out of the ground to the surface, was only about $1 a barrel. So they pumped oil, insane amounts of oil that they had the capability to do, and we flooded the world with cheap oil. Oil that was backed in the transit by American military. So it was an oil, our dollar, and they had to trade the oil in dollars. So it was a oil-backed dollar. Why did they change that back under the Nixon administration from a gold-backed dollar to what amounts to an oil-backed dollar? Because you use it, it does work. It's consumed in the action of its use. So you have the dollar backed on energy. The world runs on energy. So there was a certain logic, and it's consumable. And when it is consumed, it does work, and things are created. Think of Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, what do you have to do? You have to mine, and you have to create something. It's a code, and the code has value because it contains information, and the information is this encoded information on a computer calculation. So there is some, logic to the creation of this long digital code. And as you build it out, it has some purported value. And so you denominate this mining process in Bitcoins. There's work being done, and it's recorded and valued, spinning the wheel as coins. And it's hard to do that work. But where you do it with oil, as you produce oil and monetize it, the oil then goes out and does work. It runs cars, tractors, airplanes, factories. Work gets done and things get created in a much more physical sense, as opposed to the ethereal digital sense of creation of a digital currency. And it gets consumed in the process. So an energy-backed currency has a certain logic to it, as opposed to, say, a metals-backed currency, which has the potential to do some work, but largely is a store of wealth. It's not an actual creator of wealth. You go hide your gold under the bed and silver, as opposed to make something out of the silver, like the silver and gold connectors and components to do work in the factories and like that, tools, machinery, electronics, etc. So at the end of the day, this energy war is continuing. Who gets to serve Europe as the supplier of energy and then get the wealth that comes from supplying that energy to Europe long term? The banks in the City of London want to control that monetization process. Which players get to monetize their energy wealth, and what banks and entities and businesses get to share in that to protect their wealth and wealth creation for the next 5 or 10 generations. And they don't want Russia in that game. Putin is being threatened because the way they close off Russia from being able to play that game is the process of hegemony, closing off its outlets, both for the flow of energy and for the military that could potentially protect the flow of that energy. Because, for example, if the Russians with the Israelis were to do that oil field, gas field off the coast of Lebanon and run the pipeline over up beside the leg of Italy to Montenegro and then into Europe, the Russian military, not the American military, would protect the integrity and the safety of that underwater pipeline all the way to Montenegro. They would be the ones creating the energy wealth, and it would be denominated in large measure in rubles or in currencies that they would directly have a piece of and control. And by the way, there's a certain logic in their mind in doing this arrangement with Israel. Why? Did you know, amongst your listeners, I've mentioned this before, Putin spent 1.5 years in his young life living in a kibbutz in Israel. To most people here in the West, they have no concept of that. What? No, he hates Israel. Excuse me, what's the largest population in Israel? This people from all over the world that are populating Israel. Russian Jews that went there, especially when we were closing down Russia, closing up shop during this last phase of the Cold War under Reagan. Putin, with this diaspora of population, Russians in Israel, believes he has a certain right and obligation because Russian citizens inside Russia and a lot of the Jews inside Israel have foreign passports with Russian dual passports. And he has a right and an obligation to protect those relationships. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong. Before what just began to happen on 2/22/22, with what Putin's doing going into Ukraine, when everybody thought he was going to invade Ukraine 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, what did he do? He did a huge military surge into Syria to further strengthen and shore up their position there, because the Syria situation, the Crimea situation, and the Ukraine situation are all connected. Because he has to protect energy flow and his military's access to warm water ports. And this Nazi operation, as he's described it, which is not inaccurate, this Nazi operation being backed by NATO, of all things, going into Ukraine and being a threat and continuing to be a festering threat on the border of Russia, similar to what was happening in Cuba with the militarization of Cuba and then the placement of nuclear weapons in Cuba back in the early 60s. And remember, I said a long time ago, 2 years ago, before this is all over, it's going to be like the Cuban Missile Crisis was in Cuba. The people of America and the people of the world are going to be in the shadow of an event just like the Cuban Missile Crisis all over again. A month and a half ago, Lavrov, the foreign minister out of Russia, said the same exact thing, practically quoted me word for word. That was on Zero Hedge's header. And it's been said over and over again over the last few days. Saturday, the Russian military released images and pictures and videos all day of every type of Russian nuclear delivery system, aircraft, intercontinental ballistic missiles, field tactical missiles, nuclear devices, all being demonstrated as a threat, a warning to the West. Don't push it. Don't push it any further. And the West hasn't backed down at all. Why? Because they think that Russia's going to be planted into a corner. Look, you can say anything you want about Putin, Russia. Look at what they did, what their losses were. The greatest losses of World War II were all the Russians, and they wouldn't back down for anything. Don't think they're going to back down now. The club that's running the West out of the city of London, the banking capital there, and pulling all those strings and out through the UN with that Rockefeller tribe, they're going to bring the world to war, and Russia, Putin, are going to give them what they want. They want to push that hard. Putin will not back down. He can't, because to allow them to do this hegemony would be the death blow to Russia. They'll go down fighting. This crew doesn't care if people in the West die, if there's a lot of loss of life, because, after the dust settles, they figure they'll win anyway. And if they have a few losses along the way, it's not their life. It's the rest of us. We're just the sheep along for the ride. All of that said,
yes,
we're coming up on a moment where somebody's going to have to blink. And you're going to hear that we're ready to fire the nuke back. They're ready to fire a Midas. Will the world actually go to nuclear war? No, we're going back into Cold War 3.0. This is a big Cold War. There was an early Cold War right after World War II. It softened a little bit. Then we came into the big one that lasted for a couple decades, that was ended under the Reagan administration, was realized under Bush 1. But it was really all of the hard work was done under the Reagan administration. We're coming back into a Cold War situation, and the whole world's going to live at the precipice for who knows how long, because neither side wants to or is capable of backing down, and we're all along for the ride. So saying that Trump is coordinating his actions with Putin, to go back to your original question statement, is a complete falsehood that some in the Western media would like to place the blame for this on Trump. And that is false. Trump is not the cause of what's going on here. What really is going on, everybody has their own reasons separately. This is death, murder on the Orient Express. What people don't understand is it wasn't one person who committed the murder. It was a whole bunch of people coordinating their actions that committed the murder. The reason that we're in this situation isn't because of Trump at all. It's a bunch of other players that like to blame it on him, but for their own reasons. Each of the players wants this conflict. Who's the one, or what's the excuse, let's say, from the Biden administration and the crowd directly around the Biden administration? Because Biden himself, he doesn't even know if he's on Mars or Earth or has already gone to heaven or hell. He has no comprehension. He can't even follow simple instructions. Turn right at the end of the sidewalk. Keep marching right off into the grass. He's out of his mind. The Biden controllers want this war because They want an insurance fire. They want, it's like the mobsters came in and they did all sorts of false transactions at the restaurant, at the sporting goods store, at the, furniture store. And they stole it blind, right and left. And now, before the banks show up to collect, they want to burn the whole thing down and write it off and get money from the insurance company. They have so many illicit transactions that have been run through the Ukraine for all of their friends and players around the world, with all their banking buddies and Vatican buddies. They have so much criminality that's been run through Ukraine. They want to burn the whole operation down now to cover their bases, to cover their tails, so that nobody can get to the truth of it anymore. So they want to burn the Ukraine down, to destroy the evidence. The $480 billion that was sent into Iran by the Obama administration, that was payoff money for all their friends around the world. Well, where did it get laundered through? It didn't get laundered through Iran. Iran was just a conduit. It went up to the Ukraine. What was the last country running commercial aircraft in and out of Tehran? It went to the Ukraine, Kiev. It was the only pipeline for the Iranians to get back out to the rest of the world. And then where did the money go from the Ukrainian banks? Down to the Vatican banks. And then out to all of their London buddies and everybody else. It was just a waypoint. But that evidence, those players that were involved in those crimes, primarily right there in the Ukraine, coordinating those actions. Now they burned down the restaurant, the sporting goods store, the furniture shop, where they were running all that through. Oh gosh, I don't know how we'll ever get to the truth of what happened. All the players are dead. If I was a Ukrainian who'd been involved in those things, I'd be looking for a rock deeper underneath to hide, because they're gonna take out those players too, so nobody can testify, nobody can talk firsthand about it. Gosh, I just don't know how we get to the truth of this. It's all messed up now. Bullshit. So this is death on the Nile, murder on the Nile. Get rid of all the evidence as fast as you can for that Biden crew and the people over them. And then other players across Europe, each for their own individual reasons, want this war. And the Russians are going to oblige, unless we get to a point in this Mexican standoff where one side or the other blinks, and it won't be Putin, is my belief. They're ready to go. They didn't want it, but they're going to oblige you. If you're going to force it on them, they'll make the calculation, and they think they got a shot. So don't blame it on Trump when it happens. That's my point.
Juan, there's a
Okay, thanks, Juan. Sorry, Rachel. I got your point there. I would never blame Trump for any of that. That's not where I was coming from. But
well, I hope that didn't bother everybody that I said it that way. But I wanted to take long enough to make that point and make it stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I just wanted to note, just at the beginning, when you said, well, it's not Trump, and then you said it's such and such and such, you said it's the City of London. The City of London is 185 Donald John Trump, but we'll park that there. But one question following on from that one is, how does the alliance use what's going on to their advantage? Because they're the masters of using, the art of war, chess moves, everything. So they'll know, they would have been anticipating this. How do they use this to further their purposes for liberating humanity?
Well, part of the issue, if you wanted to say, is Putin, I personally don't buy into the whole concept of the alliance thing. And there's the players that use that terminology. Words do mean things. And so they've brought a lot of baggage along with some of that terminology. It might at some level be accurate, but the baggage they bring on with all their little extra things with, the blue chicken aliens and everything else is not accurate. It just isn't the way it is. They've brought a lot of baggage in there that I certainly am not wanting any guilt by association with or pushing and promoting. Is there a some type of value, not coordinated, but understood. Those are very different words. Is there some understanding from Putin's side that if he does his actions in certain ways in Ukraine, he helps to preserve the evidence that some players are hoping gets burned down in the insurance fire? In his method, is he hoping to preserve enough of the critical key information that at some later point in the West, we can use to take down some of the players that, by the way, are the ones behind the threat against Russia? I believe so. I believe he intends not to oblige those players out of the city of London, not to oblige those players who he has identified as Nazi-esque players. He's not going to go in and do their dirty work for them by burning up and destroying and killing the very people that could exonerate him for what he's about to do and is doing at this exact second. He would love to see the West come in, strip a gear, going after some of these players, including the ones that were behind fraud in America and the placement of people in control positions over America that are really working for foreign masters. And so he'll help with that, but it's not because he's coordinating his actions with anyone. He just has read the tea leaves correctly. His intelligence agencies have understood what's really going on, and they're going to make sure to the best of their ability, without damaging themselves, if they can preserve some of that information, some of those people, even taking them into protective arrested custody. He can provide them out to the world later as needed to, help those prosecutions to go after the monsters that have been going. Look, back, it's the earlier example was Kosovo. You had the bad guys shooting good guys and bad guys to make a particular look. You had the same thing with the whole Maidan revolution, where the supposed good guys were actually killing some of the good people to amp up the war with snipers and things like that. It's completely insane, the whole Orange Revolution thing. And some of those Orange Revolutionaries were transported, trained by three-letter agencies here in the West, and then transported to America. They were part of even the false aspects of the January 6th events here in America. A lot of that information is going to come out over time. It will become public. It will be the basis of Nuremberg type trials out into the future, but it's not because it's a coordinated effort that is so crucial. People are going to argue over that. I can hear it right now. Well, fine, argue it all you want. It's just not true. Putin is not coordinating anything, even though there may be some understandings. In the intelligence world, oftentimes they'll share a piece here, they share a piece there, there's kind of an understanding, but actually coordinating the actions is a completely different thing than understanding that actions you do may provide opportunities for the other side to do certain things, but they're not coordinating. It's a big, huge difference.
Juan, so is this going to be the world's come to Jesus moment? What do you think with all that going on?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a awakening moment. You won't be able to sleep through some of the traumas to come. You could be as dense as they come, only worried about what time am I picking up the kids from school? Are we going to go to the football game tonight? Are we going to go play on our jet skis this weekend? Doesn't matter how disconnected you want to be. you're going to be awake, understanding it could all turn to glass tomorrow. It could all burn down. And by the way, if you don't want to, think about it, I'm just going to put it out of my mind, because if it happens, it happens. Who cares? Okay, but along the way, instead of $2 a gallon gas, $3 a gallon gas, $4 a gallon gas, $5 a gallon gas, I have stuff from Los Angeles with $6.19 a gallon for premium yesterday in Los Angeles. I run premium in most of my cars because I drive hot rods. $6.19. 3 years ago, I was paying $2.19. The price of fuel, energy, is going to the moon, and it's not stopping. It's cresting $100 a barrel right now. It'll be 120, 140, 150 in the next couple of weeks because of the trauma. If you're cutting off oil supply out of Russia and you're going to stop it off, you're going to have prices going through the moon. And we've shut down oil production in America in large measure because this administration came in and neutralized the policies of the Trump administration. And so you're not doing domestic production. You're making foreign players very wealthy outside the United States, where those foreign players control the making of energy. Against the interests of Americans, against the interests of Canadians, because they're driving the price to outer space for their own enrichment. Our military has to protect oil production in foreign locations. It's the same scam we've been playing, been under the protection racket going back to the 60s and the 70s. So at the end of the day, is this the event that wakes up the whole world? Well, you can go out in your jet ski and you got to pay $8 a gallon for gas, $9 a gallon for gas here in the US. Look, in Canada, Europe, Europe, where you're at, Tom, your distances that you drive every day are relatively modest, and you pay high fuel prices because you're not driving that far. You get out here into flyover country America, you go into the grocery store, it's 100 miles both directions. You're going to go to Costco or something like that, you drive into the main town. For a lot of people, if you're doing farming, it's huge fuel intensive work. Those tractors do not run on air. So your food costs go to the moon. If you're building, steel for the buildings has to be transported by trucks and trains and everything else. That's energy. And it costs a lot of money. The concrete plants don't run on air. And you're not going to fuel them with wind turbines and solar collectors. You could cover the state of Nevada in solar collectors, and you'd be able to power the Western states. Completely cover it. It's not happening. It's a ruse. It's playtime. It's bullshit. The higher BTU density of oil, the efficiency of it, that's where you're going to end up being for the foreseeable future. We can bring in other technologies. You don't bring them in overnight. There's a transfer, and the politics has favored not doing the transfer in a coherent, logical way. It protects a bunch of little clubs along the way. It's like alcohol in the fuel. Okay, you can go look at Chevrolet's information on the Chevrolet Impala. If you run it on regular gasoline, it gets 21.5 miles a gallon. This is 10-year-old information, but it's the same thing today. If you run it on alcohol-based fuel, 10% alcohol in a engine that's designed to run on 10% alcohol, you have to do certain things to harden it to run on this blended fuel, because it's harder on the valve train and things like that. It's harder on the fuel delivery system because there's not the lubricants in the fuel. With alcohol, it's runnier, it's thinner, it's wipes the oils off parts. So when you run Chevy Impala on alcohol-based fuel, you pay more for the car, about $4,000 more for the car to have it all set up to be able to run that. And then it gets 19.5 miles a gallon instead of 21.5 miles a gallon. That's 10% less fuel efficiency. Well, excuse me, if I add water to my scotch, do I have more scotch? Well, it takes up more bottle space, but no, I've just diluted the scotch. That's why people use ice cubes that aren't, that don't melt, frozen pieces of metal and things like that. You throw them in there and they hold the cold, but when they warm up, nothing dilutes the scotch. So at the end of the drink, it's still the same purity of scotch. If you use ice cubes and it melts, now you're watered down scotch. I don't get more scotch by watering it down. I don't get more fuel by watering down the fuel. The 10% alcohol doesn't give you more fuel efficiency. It gives you less fuel efficiency. And it's proportionate. You're paying more for less. It's the stupidest, dumbass thing on the planet. But a bunch of politicians can't figure it out. Why? Because they get paid enough money by lobbyists to do stupid. And then this administration has gone full, total retard on the way they're handling stuff into this Russian situation. The reality is, I don't care if you're going to politicians in London or politicians in Germany or politicians in America. The amount of ignorance and historical ignorance about this situation with Russia is epic. You can't hardly talk to a politician in the United States, even the ones that are a little bit informed, and have any understanding of the underlying reason why what's going on in the Ukraine today is happening at all, or its connections to other regions like Syria, like North Africa, like Saudi Arabia and Iran. They can't tie these pieces together for anything, but I guarantee you, the globalists that are running this operation know exactly what's at stake and exactly why they're doing this. And they have made a calculation that they can lose millions of lives. And in their long march of time projections, it's a speed bump on the way to their global new world order. Putin has also made a calculation, and he's not going to get run over by these steamrollers across time, and he's going to make a stand. And the only way he can really stop them at the end of the day is threaten to use his nukes. You know, it's a doomsday weapon mentality. It's a mad policy, mutually assured destruction. He believes that if he plays that coin hard enough, maybe he gets these guys to back down. But if they won't, it's life or death for Russia. So he'll play that coin. This is Casino Royale for planet Earth. The stakes could not be higher. And we are all in the balance while these globalist players roll the dice for your life.
Happy thoughts.
Rachel.
Well,
Juan, there's a theory going around on Telegram and Twitter. There's a Twitter thread, and it's gone now, which usually means that it's probably correct, but who knows? That Putin is choosing certain parts of Ukraine where there are biolabs that he's targeting. Is there any truth to that, or have you heard that?
well, there's a lot of things. There's not just that. We have some other things that are there in the neighborhood. They have very carefully mapped out where the threat locations are, including things that could be construed after the fact as Russia did this horrible thing or that horrible thing. So they want to take those out because at the end of the day, they don't want to destroy the Ukraine. That's what Putin has said. And I believe he's saying what he said pretty accurately. He's going to demilitarize and denazify. And later on, he can come back and he can show his evidence and try to convince the world that what he's saying is true, that here's what we found and here's the players behind it. And so we were totally justified in doing what we did. Because he believes, I think he is under the understanding, if you want to say there's some coordination, he's in the understanding that there is going to be Nuremberg type trials for the monsters that have been taking the world down this path, and that there is an effort that will prevail in the West coming out of the United States military establishment to engage these globalists and expose what they've done and intended to do across the world, and that exposure for him includes these operations going on in the Ukraine that they're going to dismantle and then have the evidence to offer the world at some later point in time. If you want to say there's something that people would construe as coordinated action, it's not so much that it's coordinated, but it's understood that if they lock those things in, at least they might be able to justify their actions after the fact to the world, in the course of the Western world, going into some kind of a takedown process for these globalists that are threatening the whole world. Am I making it clear enough? I know this is kind of complex for some people and they just don't see it or understand it, but for those that take a minute or two, maybe I can get it into a zone that they can grasp.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Do you think?
So really, you're saying that Putin is doing a good thing, really? I mean, at least from his perspective and from Russia's, and from the way you're describing him, which is kind of where I'm coming from, that he's not necessarily a bad player. He's just doing what's necessary.
Those words mean things. It's not about even good or bad, except to his people. From Russia's perspective, from Putin's perspective, he's doing what must be done. He's not there on a policing action. He's not the policeman to the Ukraine or that region. He is doing what he's doing out of a necessity to protect Russia, his tribe, the Russian people. He's forced to take these actions. He's not doing it as a good guy showing up as a policeman. Hey, they're up to all sorts of mischief in Ukraine. All right, let's catch the bad guys, throw them in jail. Are you kidding me? This is life and death. That's not good guy, that's survival. Big difference in terms, man. Most people are looking at this whole situation as a game. And good guys and bad guys, it's like a football game. It's a rugby game. It's entertainment. For him, for his tribe, it's life and death. And they have been pushed as far as they can comfortably go and still have a reasonable sense that they'll survive. Beyond some certain point, the only option becomes the nuclear option. Why would he go into Ukraine to do this denazification? Because it's the same exact logic as why we went and did what we did over Cuba 70 years ago, 60 years ago, because we could not allow nuclear weapons to be down within that zone so close to America with no room, even if we developed other interception capabilities, which we didn't have at the time, to be placed right there. So we made it a huge Mexican standoff. Putin has the same logic. It's just that's a bridge too far. He cannot allow that. And that's not what the agreements were at the end of the Cold War. So the violations are coming out of the West to the agreements from the Cold War era. He's doing what he has to do to protect Russian interests. Is that a good or a bad thing? It's survival. It's survival. What's he supposed to do? Wait until there is no option but go to nuclear war? It's an intermediate step that he's taking to try and keep from having to go to the only option is the mad option and live in that situation perpetually for the next 50, 100 years. They got to sit there with a Nazi operation on their border into Russia every single day for the next 50, 100 years. The energy, the bleed down to Russia from that continuous threat in their mind is not an option. So they must do this to stop this from happening, where they're just under this perpetual, all the time, threat of the pendulum slicing them every stroke. That's where it's at. Now, you can agree with it, you can disagree, you can whine and moan from the West, but we should be able to threaten Russia. We hate Russia. Russia should have a threat all the time. They're commies, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, if that's your logic, that's your logic, but don't expect them to just sit there and take it. Not forever. If you're going to do this, you're threatening them. Even a cornered rabbit will fight once it gets, the threat becomes instant enough. Might not be effectual, but it'll do the best it can against the fox. They're not going to wait that late. The bear is coming alive, and it's coming alive because we're forcing it to. There you go.
Juan, I watched your fiery conversation with Nino. I think it was yesterday. I watched it this morning. And I don't know how you don't speak like that in every interview. It's just frustrating. When I post a video with you, the comments underneath are usually people whining and complaining that it's not happening fast enough, and it takes everything in me not to lose it. So thank you for being very candid in that interview. And if you guys are watching right here and you haven't seen that, you should definitely go check out that interview with Juan and Nino from yesterday.
Well, and one thing, by the way, we didn't have lavalier mics on us, and so I was a little bit concerned that people could hear what I was saying. And so some of our audience has hearing aids and other stuff. Others of them have perfectly good ears, and they thought I was yelling and screaming, and I wasn't. I was just trying to make sure that they could hear what I was saying clearly at a certain level. But I also get pissed off. I mean, it's just like, saying Trump is coordinating with Putin, there's hidden agreement and all that. That just lights me up. It's just so frustrating because that's commonly said. And to people that then hear that, oh yeah, Trump, he's still the bad guy. And it's a portion of the conversation that is just so wrong. It dilutes, it deters, it diverts the conversation from an honest conversation. You hit a few trigger words, and all of a sudden, we're going back in time to a romper room and playland. It's time for people to grow up and understand these issues in a more mature way. Look, this has to be a more adult conversation. And the way that the media in this modern era has reduced an honest conversation to just a few trigger words and juvenile, playground taunts and rants without really fully understanding the magnitude of the importance of the conversations at the nation state level. We've been reduced to silly talk. And at this exact moment, silly talk with nuclear weapons makes 0 sense. Grow up. Russia has interests. Putin is protecting those. They're about how you're going to survive in a global economy over the next 50 and 100 years. he's taking his moves to preserve options for the Russian people. And we have globalists working against the interests of everybody who do want to burn the whole fucking world down by any means possible through frauds like we've watched over the last couple of years, self-termination, cutting off our own energy supplies, doing things to destroy our food supply. Whatever means necessary to self-terminate the whole world and only leave their little tribe of people. 1 out of every 14 people would be the survivors in their game for their operations. But for the rest of it, it's not a game. It's life and death. This is about survival, survival of the fittest. That means a sober, coherent, intelligent, trained mind that sees things the way they really are and makes intelligent, informed decisions, not news speak, not playtime news speak answers from a bunch of talking heads. Oh, I'm sunny, I'm joyous, I'm happy. Newscasters who really are the meanest, most vitriolic, ornery people on the world, and aren't actually having a informed conversation. They're having happy talk. It's insane. It drives me absolutely nuts. Oh, let's be whoopee and happy and joyous as you're watching pontificating over the destruction of the world. This is a serious moment, a serious conversation. Lives have already been lost. Many more are on the line. And we have to have an intelligent, coherent adult conversation.
Have we identified all of the bad players? I know like the timeline of everything got shifted back because I think maybe, this is just my own opinion, that maybe we underestimated how deep the swamp ran. And I think maybe you even alluded to that. Have we identified all of the swamp, or are we still finding new swamp creatures every day?
Well, I think you'd have to say that we're going deeper than we've gone. You go deeper and deeper in the ocean. As I was pointing out, I did a presentation with a bunch of politicians years and years ago, and I was on the back of a large ship. And I was pointing out that, you look out across the ocean, we had seen a few dolphins. There was a section where we went through that had some sailfish jumping out of the water and back in. It was kind of fun. But as you look out across the area with the birds and the sea life that was visible, you only saw a tiny fraction. You get down in the water around the boat and there's all sorts of sea life. Some of it, pretty wild and bizarre. And as you go deeper and deeper, have you seen what the sea life looks like when you get down a half a mile or a mile and further down into the ocean, and the bizarre aspects of those creatures who work down there so far from the light, and they look so alien to anybody up at the surface? The ocean is full of all sorts of life. When you get into these intelligence operations, when you get into these deep state operations, when you get into the machinations between countries, within the financial markets, the banking, everything else, it's insane what the life forms look like that make the world go round, the agreements behind the scenes, the meetings in Vienna between all the various people to make business transactions, political decisions happen to keep the world going round. Very bizarre. Players that you'd think would never work together, but that rarefied depth absolutely do work together because that's how it's done. Agreements and understandings behind the scenes, not even a handshake, but an understanding there's the line. We're going to do this. You do that. We'll get along together. I remember in South America when we had the wars on cocaine production, and it's being moved to the United States, and the agreements between the various gangs, and then they started to break down, and you had people from various governments around the world, representatives come in, from governments you would have thought are good guys, and yet they're coordinating with the drug lords for bombings and materials to conduct this war at a deeper level over who gets to control the flow of drugs into the United States. And to most people, it's just some drug lords, yet it was huge business. And you had heads of state from multiple countries involved in various aspects of that war over how they were going to control the flow of drugs and the customer base in the United States, completely unseen by most of the policing agencies here in the West. A much deeper conversation. Now you're talking about that there in Europe and across the world. We have a war on our hands that's far more sophisticated, far deeper than most people even begin to comprehend. And lives are on the line, lives are at stake. Just like Syria was nothing about what most people thought it was, and Putin said it's red line on certain things. And, we skated near there. Thus far, Russia and Putin and Assad have prevailed and won that war against the West. I think they can win this again there in the Ukraine. And by the way, during this opportunistic moment, pay attention to Taiwan. China's waiting until we're fully engaged before it takes its next action. They want to work in a power vacuum. There's a lot going on here. I'm sorry, I probably didn't answer your question, but I'm still ranting.
Now, is there going to be like a book written once this is all said and done, many years down the road, that has like everything so we can just learn the full truth? Or
You'll be writing it, Rach.
Well, okay. Somebody needs to tell me what's really happening first. I need to be able to understand everything in its entirety. But there needs to be different levels. There needs to be like the book where people like us who want to learn everything and who are pretty well informed, in my opinion. I'm sure I only know a little bit compared to what Juan knows, obviously. And then we need to have another book that normies can read, that they're just completely waking up and they just scratch the surface of knowledge.
The Great Awakening for Dummies.
Kind of, yeah.
I don't think, you know what, let me say this. When you're in a combat situation, you can come in a little bit naive, but by the time you get through it, if you're in the field for any period of time, things get boiled down enough that usually you become pretty aware of what's real and what's not the real news. That's why long-term engagement, it's not, if it's just a policing action, you're just around patrolling out at the perimeter and, get blown up here or there, whatever, that's a little different. But if you're in the actual engagement, street by street, really engaging, you start to get pretty understanding of what's really going on, who the real players are, what's really at stake, pretty quickly. Guys out there in Vietnam, they're watching supply ships going up Mekong Delta. Where are they going? Taking supplies to the enemy. Well, why aren't we stopping them? Well, because we have certain agreements. What in the world is going on here? Why don't we get to go into these other countries where the supply lines are? That's what Nixon did at the end. That kind of brought the war to a crescendo, going into Laos and beyond. At some certain point, people begin to realize, what's happening. Look what happened with MacArthur and the UN and Truman trying to control that it was a policing action, and they couldn't go back to the source and stop the actual war at the source. They were just going to sit there perpetually and do a policing action. And finally, MacArthur does an end run around the the forces at Incheon, supposedly in the heat of battle, violates the president's order, and then he's the one that gets slapped on the hand and taken out of his position militarily. People wake up, whether it's a general or a private, they wake up eventually to save their life. And the ones that don't wake up, there's a scripture that says that people that are ignorant in Proverbs pay a price for their ignorance. People that are fools pay a price for their foolishness. If you're just going to go along and you don't want to know the details and you don't want to be bothered with that, pretty good likelihood that you're going to pay a price. And the price can be very high for choosing to remain ignorant or foolish. You will be somebody else's cannon fodder. You will get run over by somebody else's tank, and you might not even be the wiser for exactly how you got there. The ones that survive figure it out pretty quickly. They know who the real monsters are. If you want to say that Putin is a survivor, if you want to say the Russian people are survivors, they have figured out who the real threat is, what the real threat is, and they're reacting to it right now. We can play the game if we want to on what's really at stake, who's pulling the strings, what's going on here in the West, like so many of the politicians are who don't grasp the history of that region going back to World War II and before. But we will pay a price and are paying a price right now. We're engaging in something where diplomacy could have worked, but it's not at this point in time. It did work previously because we had agreements at the end of the Cold War on how we would bring NATO forces into that region and engage, and they've now been turned on their ear. Was it wise to turn them on their ear? I don't know. But don't misunderstand. There's a reason why this is happening. It is because we have now set those aside, gone to engage them a different way. So, okay, it's back on. Do we need to take down Russia like we took down the Soviet Union? Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we want to do. They're not going to go along with it. So, is that globalists who want that done? Or is that actually in the Western interest for the people of Europe, for the people of the United States, for the people of the world, even for Russia, the people in Russia? Is that in the best interest of Russia? Well, somebody's decided it is, so it's on.
Juan, are we going to see, going back to some of the thoughts I had at the beginning in regards to President Trump, are we going to see then, if the US gets sucked into this in a more physical way, i.e. they have to, troops, etc., are we going to see a point where Joe Biden is exposed as not being the commander-in-chief of the military? Is that one of the cards that's going to be shown during this, what's happening in Ukraine?
The way that you would have to understand this is that a lot of people talk about, and a lot of your audience is aware of, the people talking about, are we in a devolution moment here in the United States? Devolution is an area of administrative law that tells people in various agencies in the American system, government, if you will, what they're supposed to do to coordinate their actions if, for some reason, a sunspot in outer space, energy from the sun, solar flare, has sent a perfectly aimed bullet at America or the world and shut down electricity, and now the country's in some disarray, fully or partially shut down, and we've got to build back. And for some reason, certain leaders have been hurt or killed or destroyed, their ability to govern correctly has been damaged. So now you got to build back and become functional again. Nuclear weapons or other types of weapons have been used, chemical, biological, other things that people don't even know about yet, have been deployed and have caused some type of massive destruction and disarray. And now you've got to build back from this bombed out, destroyed condition. And so in devolution, you have a decentralized, but to as much of an extent as possible, coordinated build back by generals, military personnel, the ones that survived relatively intact and can be stitched together to rebuild a functional country and commerce and military and everything else to protect the people that remain, that are still alive, that are still functional, and bring some order back to society, including, very importantly, lawful representation of the people by elected leadership, elected by the people, to manage that rebuild as quickly as reasonably possible. And in the interim, for military leaders to have legal authority conveyed to them, bestowed on them, to work the problem until the baton could be handed back to people who would represent the population through elections. In that interim period, that's this devolution moment where governmental operations have devolved through some mechanism instantaneously or by degrees, and they must then capture the moment and try to get it under control and rebuild proper lawful representation of people. That's one way that continuity in governance is maintained. There are several options. I only mention that precisely because many, many people have understood that the things going on in America as a result of the vote fraud or the viral attack and other mechanisms may be in play, and we may be arguably in that kind of a situation. I would construe that it's slightly different. I was with somebody who's an SES member, Senior Executive Service, who was being very coy about where he's at, what he's doing in relation to 9/11 and the day after and stuff like that, as though he's, within the group that's got sole responsibility for continuity in government in America at this point, if we were under some kind of attack. The reality is that person and the people around him misunderstand the moment that we're in. And they think that they would be the ones who would handle that moment. SES was created under the Carter administration. It's a relatively recent creation. The highest paid members of government in the American system are SES members, and they're taken out of the political world, the corporate world, every area of industry in America, and they're tapped in order to keep America on point and rebuild it after some kind of an attack. But it's done from a different direction, from the administrative side of government perspective. And there's certain triggers within the Department of Homeland Security and other things that can trigger an SES coordinated response, say after a 9/11, et cetera. And there's triggers that some believe that are already in play there. But that's an option. It's one of several. The other, and that is done from a policing side primarily, by the way, an executive office, congressional policing side of government aimed internally. The military side of a continuity in government as though we've been attacked, as opposed to just having, say, a sunspot hit the planet or alien landing or something like that. The militarized side is much older, and it goes back from certain aspects. You could say it goes back to the Marines in the 1800s, 1834, beyond. But in reality, in the modern era, it precisely goes back to the changes that occurred in 1954 Military Code of Justice that were coordinated with the introduction of nuclear weapons. And that militarized response for continuity in government, where weapons of mass destruction may have been utilized against the American people, that militarized response falls within what is commonly understood today as Q clearance operations. And that's a Department of Energy classification for nuclear weapons access and control that came into play after World War II. Those Q clearance operations include very precisely what's going on right now in America. Cheyenne Mountain was closed up by Donald Trump, President Trump, Commander-in-Chief Trump, March 15th of 2020, long before the election. Out of an abundance of caution, he said, we are closing up this facility, sealing those forces inside there, because we may already have been attacked and not realize it yet. We may already be at war. That continuity in government backstop for America has different legal thresholds than exists at SES, Senior Executive Service, and different players involved. And there is a bit of a war going on behind the scenes between which group or groups have the legal authority to control what's going on in America at this time. And even the foreign governments like Putin, like Xi over in China, are looking at what's going on in America and trying to read the tea leaves, who's actually in control. And I can guarantee you, Putin does not believe for one thin second that Biden's running the whole operation, and neither does Xi. They see that there's other groups at some kind of a conflict level over who's really in charge here. Well, is it a policing operation? And are there policing forces? And who's running that? Or is there something bigger? And what's the trigger that they're working from? What's the threat that they're doing? And the biggest threat, the biggest weapon in this whole thing is nuclear and beyond. So who holds that card? As the situation in the Ukraine escalates at this point of contact for Russia and Putin, it's going to come into question, who do we really have to worry about pushing the button from the American side on nukes? And that's what their real threshold is. They will play it as close as they can to the edge without crossing over, because I guarantee Putin does not want nuclear war. He doesn't. Even if the globalists do, he doesn't want 13 out of 14 people dead, and he doesn't want to preside over that. But he's also not going to just stand by and self-terminate or allow people to come in there and by degrees starve Russia and the Russian people out. The Russian people look at Putin like a superhero, and he's going to play the part.
Well, thanks, Juan. I love your Terminator references, self-terminate. Saw that a lot. So thanks for that. I think we have to wrap up soon because it's pretty late over on this side of the globe. Any final quick questions, girls?
I wanted to ask him if he'd come on my show someday, but other than that, I'm fine.
Well, I'd be glad to do that. I will say that I have an extremely busy schedule. The reason that I enjoy doing the show with you folks is because I enjoy getting access. You have a lot of listeners out across the Commonwealth countries, and they're in London, and that's an audience I don't get a lot of access to, and I want to, be able to have the conversations out into that audience where some of this might be a bit more obscure. And I talk to American audiences more commonly, but I want to take that couple of minutes and at least give a perspective that they might not be getting other places for their consideration. And so I do appreciate that opportunity. That said, you have no idea how busy it is for me, and it is very hectic for me day to day. So it's really hard to plan more than a few hours in advance. And of course, as you know, Tom, we had tried to do something earlier, but my schedule stopped me earlier, and I had things that had to be done that couldn't wait. So I apologize for that, but I mean, that's the difficult. I just can't plan too far in advance on some of this because I am really at a very full schedule.
I think you have
Rachel?
I think you wear the cape.
There you go.
Well,
Rachel?
yeah, that's because I spill food a lot and I slop some of my stuff, and so that way I can at least keep from having to take more shirts to the cleaners. I don't know if it's a cape or a bib.
Sure.
Oh my goodness.
My mom always said I was the messiest. So,
Oh,
yeah.
That's sad. Well, there's always hope,
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do some somewhere.
You'll
But go ahead.
grow up someday.
Yeah.
Rachel, did you have something before we go?
I had a question, but it'll probably take him a long time to answer, so we can save it for the next one, maybe.
No, ask it. I'll give a quick answer.
Well, it has nothing to do with current events. I was just curious how do you know all of this? Can you give us any inkling of your background? And I would love to write a book on your life whenever that comes out.
The 107 story.
The 107. Who is 107? Really?
Yeah, somewhere, someday.
Well, that was
this moment is not the right moment. We have bigger fish to fry at this moment. Look, there's everybody has opinions, and I have opinions based on my life experiences and contacts and like that. I try to make the case as coherently and intelligently for why I see things or express them a certain way. I will say this, I'm not interested in or trying to be somebody's guru. I'm giving you the information based on my experience, knowledge of events, various of the players. But at the end of the day, the listeners do have to weigh it themselves and decide if they agree or disagree. And people disagree all the time. I had a fairly contentious conversation the other day on the other coast, and this individual was not a lightweight, very informed person, very connected, but saw things so completely differently. But that's because they were SES, and their history in that organization puts them from a different perspective. And so their understanding was well earned. They've paid a price. They have certain understanding that you can't just blow past it and blow them off like they don't know what they're talking about. But I did try to make a very precise case why what he perceived is going on and the mechanics of what's going on right now don't fit where he's coming from and make it as precise as possible. Will over time he come to my understanding, perception, view, belief? I think he will have to, but that's my belief. So at the end of the day, it's up to everybody to kind of do their own legwork. And then what's the purpose? To what point? Because you have to survive. And so the things that I'm sharing might help you to get in a mental zone where you do a little bit better, because you make certain decisions that put you in a better position to be a survivor. When you're in a war zone, you don't want to stick your head up, if you're a civilian, in the middle of a firefight. You get your head blown off. Keep your head down, anticipate where the fight's going, and get out of the way. A lot of what's going on right now out across the world is so big, you're not going to stop it. So how do you get out of the way of it and prepare to be viable for the far side of this thing when the dust settles, to be in as good a position as possible? And if you have some influence over who gets to win the fight, well, have the influence to be, on the winning team. This is a very big fight. There's a lot at stake. And at the end of the day, the other thing, I see it commonly, you have to ask God himself for direction and guidance to do the things, put you in the places, have the protection to survive in the midst of this fight. What's right for me might not have anything to do in the whole world with what's right for you, where you're at, what's going on in your zone, in your tribe. So information that we provide may give you kind of a background context, but your personal picture, your place in the picture, you need divine assistance to get to the right answer for you. And so instead of looking to regurgitated food from the mama bird, go find your own worm, get fresh meat, ask God himself for personal divine instruction, assistance, guidance, and be responsible for that. It's up to you to hear directly from God. There's no intermediary that's going to be able to provide those little extra pieces that might affect how you survive or your family survive. And what's best for you? Should you be in a cryptocurrency? Should you be in gold bars? Should you have gasoline in the basement? Or should it be diesel so it doesn't blow up on you? What are those specific decisions that you have to make to be a survivor in your own house and to protect your own family from, what's going on this bigger scale? Ultimately, we're all in the hand of God and need to think that way. If I provide some kind of context and it's interesting and it gets you in a zone, it still only gets you in a zone. You personally need divine assistance, not a guru, a Cape Crusader to come save the day for you. You are responsible to find that assistance from God himself to get you through this. Even if you have a certain perception of what's going on, that's the thing that I would say. And then that's my prayer for everyone in your audience, that God himself, if you ask God, God's as serious as you are. God is as serious as you are. If you're serious and you ask him for help and guidance, instruction, he is a very serious God and will provide that. He answers prayer. You ask him for bread, he's not going to give you a stone. You ask him for fish, he's not going to give you a serpent to bite you and poison you to death. God is faithful. Operate accordingly. It's up to you. Make a sincere prayer. He's a sincere God. He'll give you a personalized, sincere answer.
Thanks, Juan. I always love it when you,
Awesome.
well, that's like the one we had at Christmas. It's always a good way to go out. I like that a lot.
Sure, guys.
Well, thanks, buddy. We'll
love
see
you.
you again soon, and let's see what happens. And let's get our own answers and direct from God, and we'll all be there. We'll be in the heavenly city together, as you like to say. So thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Kathy. And thank you, Juan.
I love you
All right,
guys.
folks.
Take
All right.
care. Bye. Bye.
All right. Bye.